Hi everyone, I'm attorney Aiden Kramer with the Law Office of Aiden H. Kramer in Colorado, and you are watching All Up in Your Business. And I kind of look like a mime. Maybe this long sleeve black shirt wasn't the best idea. Oh well, too late now. As you probably know from watching my last few episodes, I'm taking a couple of episodes to answer some of the questions that you guys send me. Today's question came from Daniel. Daniel asked me, what type of entity structure would optimize performance and maximize money in my pocket? That is a great question because as a business owner myself, I know that it is sometimes tough to decide how you should structure your business to make it as easy as possible, but also to make it as profitable as possible. So I'm going to go over the three most popular types of entity structures and talk about some of the pros and cons of each and which ones typically work for most small startups. And of course, as per usual, I am going to recruit my fantastic graphics department to put together some great educational graphics to explain these things to you. So here we have the three most common types of structures for a small business. We have a sole proprietorship, a limited liability company or an LLC, and a C corporation. I want to just put it out there that these are just three of the most common ones. There are a lot more options. There are general partnerships, limited liability partnerships, cooperative, nonprofit corporations. I'm not going to talk about those because they are pretty much endless and not very popular, so I'm going to focus just on these three. Sole proprietor. If you're operating as a sole proprietor, this means that you haven't really formed any legal structure of a business entity. If you're just an individual going out and starting a business, starting to provide services to people, you're operating as a sole proprietor. Now, you may be operating under a trade name. If you're Aiden and you've started Aiden's Lawn Mowing Service, then my trade name is Aiden's Lawn Mowing Service. In that instance, I should file a statement of trade name with the Secretary of State to register the fact that I'm operating under that trade name. But just because I've got a trade name doesn't mean I'm an LLC or any kind of an entity. I'm still just a sole proprietor. With a sole proprietor, tax-wise, all of the income to the business is taxed as personal income to the business owner. And one of the biggest drawbacks of a sole proprietorship is that there's no liability protection whatsoever for the business owner. So if the business gets sued, it is in essence the individual business owner being sued, and all of the business owner's assets are subject to liability for any of the liabilities of the business. The biggest pro of a sole proprietorship is that it's easy to start. You just start a business and you're a sole proprietor. So a sole proprietor might be good for businesses that are not very high risk with liability. If the industry is very unlikely that you will be sued, then a sole proprietorship might be appropriate for you. But I generally don't recommend sole proprietorships just because of that no liability protection and the fact that LLCs, generally speaking, are pretty easy to form. So let's move on to the limited liability company. The LLC is definitely the most popular entity formation, and that is because it is inexpensive and relatively simple to start and to run an LLC. All you have to do in most cases is file articles of organization with the Secretary of State or whatever other agency operates business organizations in your state. You'll need to draft an operating agreement for your LLC, which is the internal document that talks about the management and the operation of your LLC. Again, as with a sole proprietorship, all the income to the business is taxed as if it were personal income to the business owner. And then finally, the biggest difference and the most important one, I think, between an LLC and a sole proprietorship is that the LLC gives you that liability protection. So if there is a lawsuit or if the LLC is subject to some liability, you as the business owner will be personally protected and your personal assets should most likely be safe from those liabilities. And then finally, we have the C corporation. The C corporation is a little bit more complicated and expensive to get set up, but there are some instances where it would be useful to have a C corporation. Now, there are three groups of players basically in a C corporation. There are the shareholders. The shareholders are basically the owners. They own shares of the corporation corporation. There is the board of directors, and the board of directors are the ones who basically make decisions about the operation of the corporation. And then we have the officers, and the officers are generally the ones who are actually participating in the business and managing the business and all of the activities of the business. In a small business, you can form as a corporation, and the shareholder, the board of directors, the officers, they can all be one person, or one person can hold multiple positions. So it is still possible to have a C corporation as a small business or as a solo business owner. To create a C corporation, you will have to file articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State. You will need to write bylaws, which are pretty much the same as an operating agreement, just with regard to a corporation. So the bylaws say how the corporation is going to be run and managed and operated. If there are going to be multiple shareholders, you're probably going to want a shareholder agreement. One of the biggest drawbacks of a corporation is that corporations are subject to double taxation. So when money comes into the business, it is taxed at the corporate rate for the corporation. And then when money is distributed to the shareholders, it's taxed again at the shareholders' rate. And then finally, just like an LLC, the corporation provides that liability protection to the shareholders and the board of directors and the officers in most instances. So if there is a lawsuit over the corporation, or if the corporation has debts or other liabilities, the shareholders and the officers and the board of directors are most likely going to be protected personally from those liabilities. I'm going to touch briefly on an S corporation. As you can see at the bottom, you can elect, that worked out well, you can elect to have your business be taxed as an S corporation. An S corporation is not an entity itself, it's merely a tax election that your business entity can make. So you can still be an LLC and be taxed as an S corporation. And by doing that, you can potentially save quite a bit of money on your tax liability. I'm not going to go into too much detail about S corporations. If you have more questions about it, you can look back to a few episodes ago where I discussed what the heck is an S corporation. I would also encourage you to look back to the previous episode where I talk about the top 10 things that every LLC needs if you're interested in starting an LLC. So generally speaking, for a vast majority of small businesses and startups, the LLC is going to be the best, most appropriate choice. It's easy and usually pretty inexpensive to get started. It's usually, depending on the state that you're in, pretty easy to run and maintain the LLC. Most states, Colorado at least, doesn't have too many requirements about what an LLC needs to do on an annual or semi-annual basis. And then you're still going to get that liability protection that you wouldn't otherwise have with a sole proprietorship. And as far as maximizing profits goes, if your business is to the point where it might be wise to elect to be taxed as an S corp, then you can do that and save a lot of money on your taxes. So Daniel, I hope that answered your question, or at least helped to answer your question. If anyone has any more questions about business structures of the different business entities, go ahead and comment them below. If you're in Colorado and would like to speak with me personally about what the best business structure or entity would be for your small business, feel free to contact me. My phone number and email are below. Otherwise, thank you all so much for watching. I'm Aiden Kramer, and I'll see you next time.